My name is Margaret Harris, and I turned 58 years old this morning. I should say that with pride. 58 years of life, of lessons, of love and loss. But instead, when I woke up, I stared at the ceiling and felt only the weight of silence pressing down on me. No voices in the kitchen, no phone calls at dawn, no grandchildren running through the hallway. Just silence, the kind that makes you notice the ticking of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator. I boiled water for tea and set one single cup on the table. Birthdays used to mean crowded living rooms, frosting on my fingers, the smell of candles burning low. Now it was just me, and the faint echo of memories I wished I could bring back. I tried not to wait for the phone to ring, but every time it buzzed with some random notification, my heart jumped, foolishly hoping it was my son, David Harris, or my daughter, Emily Harris. They knew what today was. At least they used to. By 10 in the morning, I had given up the pretense. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and opened the door to check the mail, more out of habit than expectation. And there it was, an envelope lying alone in the metal box, cream-coloured, slightly worn, with no return address. No stamps, just my name, written in a hand I didn't recognise. Margaret Harris. My full name, carefully written as if the writer wanted me to know. This was personal. I stood in the hallway longer than I should have, the paper trembling slightly in my fingers. For a second, I thought it might be from David Harris. Maybe he wanted to surprise me, to make me cry with guilt for doubting him. But the handwriting was too old-fashioned, with loops and flourishes that reminded me of letters from another time. Back inside, I placed the envelope on the table next to my untouched cup of tea. I didn't rush to open it. Something about it felt heavy, like whatever waited inside could shift the ground beneath me. Finally, I tore it open and unfolded a single sheet of paper. The first line made my chest tighten. You don't know me, but I know what was taken from you. I froze. My eyes moved over the words again and again, each one sharper than the last. The letter spoke of secrets buried in my family long ago, of choices made behind closed doors, of truths I was never meant to find. No names, no details, just a promise that I had been deceived, and an invitation to uncover the truth. My tea had gone cold. My birthday had become something else entirely. No candles, no laughter, just a letter with no return address. And the terrifying possibility that my life, as I thought I knew it, was built on lies. I live in a small apartment on the 4th floor, overlooking a narrow street where the trees lean close enough to brush against the windows when the wind is strong. It is quiet here, sometimes too quiet. After 58 years of living, you'd think I would be used to silence, but the truth is, silence is something that never becomes natural. It stretches and echoes, especially when you know it used to be filled with voices you loved. Every morning I move through the same routine, tea kettle, the same blue cup, the same chair by the window. I water the plants that cling to the sunlight on the sill. I check the news. I listen to the sound of footsteps in the hall as neighbours come and go. It's all predictable, safe, and unbearably empty at times. When I was younger, birthdays meant chaos in the best sense. Children tugging at balloons, the smell of a cake fresh from the oven, David Harris and Emily Harris giggling while they tried to sneak frosting from the bowl. I can still see them, sticky fingers, wide eyes, voices calling "Happy birthday, Mom," as if it were the most magical day of the year. Back then, I didn't notice how quickly those moments would vanish. I thought there would always be more. Now birthdays come with a different flavour. A polite card in the mail, sometimes a hurried phone call, often nothing at all. Everyone is busy. Everyone has their own lives. At least, that's what I tell myself when the apartment feels too big for just me. The walls are lined with photographs that mark the years I keep trying to hold on to. Emily Harris in her graduation gown, David Harris on his first day at university, the three of us together on the front porch of the old house before it was sold. I stand in front of those photos more often than I admit, tracing their faces with my eyes, wondering how the distance between us grew so wide. It's strange. After 50, people tell you that life settles down, that you find comfort in routine. But sometimes the routine feels like a prison. The same walks to the grocery store, the same cashier who recognizes me, the same evenings with a book I've already read twice. There are nights I sit in the dark with only the streetlights filtering through the curtains, remembering the way laughter used to bounce off these walls. My apartment is not unhappy. It's safe, it's mine, but it carries an echo, a reminder of what once was. And now, with that letter on my table whispering of secrets I never asked for, I realize that even in this quiet life, change can arrive uninvited. Sometimes it comes not with a knock at the door, but with an envelope that waits in the shadows of your mailbox. The letter sat on the table like an intruder that refused to leave. I had opened it. Yes, but I couldn't bring myself to fold it back into the envelope. It was as if the paper itself carried a weight, a vibration I could almost feel in my fingertips. Every time my eyes drifted toward it, the words returned to me. You don't know me, but I know what was taken from you. Taken from me. The phrase clung to my mind like smoke. I read the lines again slowly, my lips whispering the sentences as though saying them aloud might make them clearer. The writer spoke of something hidden, something buried in my family's history, something they claimed I had been kept from. No names, no places, no dates, only a warning. The truth always surfaces, Margaret Harris, and when it does, you will have to decide what kind of mother, what kind of woman you truly are. I pressed the paper flat against the table and stared at it until my vision blurred. What kind of woman I truly am? Was this a cruel joke? Some stranger's idea of entertainment to unsettle a lonely woman on her birthday? Yet, deep inside, there was a flicker, a recognition I didn't want to admit. Because if I was honest, I had always felt that something about my family story didn't add up. I thought of David Harris and Emily Harris, my children now grown, busy, distant. What could possibly be hidden that they didn't know, that I didn't know? Their father, Robert Harris, had been gone for years. Divorce papers finalised long ago, silence between us since. Could this letter be connected to him? Or to the shadows of arguments I once overheard, the unfinished sentences, the way Robert used to turn his face away when certain topics came up? The handwriting looked aged but steady, the ink slightly faded at the edges as if the note had been carried, pocketed, then finally delivered. Whoever wrote it wanted me to believe they held knowledge. Knowledge about me, about my life, about secrets I had lived alongside without ever realizing. I lifted the letter once more, reading the final lines slowly, carefully. You deserve to know what was stolen, even if it breaks everything. The words made my hands tremble. My first instinct was to rip the paper in half, throw it away, pretend it never arrived. To return to the safety of my quiet apartment, my tea, my predictable days. But the truth was already alive in me now, crawling through every memory, whispering questions I could no longer silence. The letter on the table was not just ink on paper, it was a mirror held up to my life. And for the first time in years, I was terrified of what I might see in the reflection. I tried to push the letter aside, but the words clung to me like burrs. What was taken from you? It followed me into the kitchen, into the small act of rinsing my cup, into the hollow rhythm of my footsteps on the wooden floor. And then, without permission, the memories began to stir. I saw David Harris at 6 years old, his hair too long and always falling into his eyes. Standing proudly in front of a birthday cake he insisted on helping me bake. His little hands were covered in flour, and he laughed so hard when the candles smoked that he nearly tipped the whole cake over. Emily Harris was there too, just 3, perched on a chair with her chin barely above the table, clapping and squealing, her cheeks flushed with excitement. That night, the living room was alive with balloons and crumbs and the sound of children's laughter. I can still hear it, as if the walls themselves kept the echoes safe for me. Those were the golden years, when love was simple and family was everything. Robert Harris would come home late but still manage to kiss me on the cheek, lift Emily Harris high into the air, and ruffle David Harris's hair. We were a picture, or at least it looked that way from the outside, but even then, small cracks had begun to form. I remember one Christmas, the first time Robert Harris didn't come home until long after the children had gone to bed. He smelled of whiskey, his smile too thin, his eyes unfocused. I asked where he had been, and he waved the question away. "Don't spoil the holiday, Margaret." The children didn't notice then. They tore open their gifts the next morning with squeals of joy, and I hid my unease behind a camera, capturing photos that looked perfect but felt hollow to me. And then there was that summer picnic when David Harris fell and scraped his knee. He ran to me crying, and Robert Harris muttered something under his breath. "He's too soft, Margaret. You baby him too much." I remember the sting of those words, the way they lodged deep inside me. It was just a comment, maybe nothing. But it was also the first sign that we were drifting into different worlds. As I stood now in my quiet apartment, the weight of those memories pressed against me. The letter had cracked open a door I had kept locked for decades, and through it spilled moments both sweet and bitter. I could almost hear the laughter of children, smell the pine needles of forgotten Christmas mornings, feel the sting of an argument whispered in the kitchen when little ears were supposed to be asleep. Memories don't just stir, they rise like ghosts, demanding to be acknowledged, and once awakened, they do not rest. I told myself I wouldn't sit by the phone. I told myself I was stronger than that I didn't need to cling to hope like a child waiting for candy. But the truth is, on your birthday, no matter how old you are, you wait. You wait for the voices of the people who carry your blood, the people you raised with sleepless nights and endless sacrifices to say the simplest words, "Happy birthday, Mom." The phone sat on the table beside the letter, its black screen like an unblinking eye. Every time it buzzed with some meaningless notification, my heart betrayed me. I reached for it too quickly, only to find a message from the phone company, an email about a sale I didn't need, a reminder about an appointment next week, but not the voice I longed for. Not David Harris. Not Emily Harris. By noon, I had made excuses for them in my mind. David Harris works long hours, he probably forgot, but he'll remember later. Emily Harris has the children to worry about. Maybe she's busy with a school project or a fever or some crisis that keeps her from calling. I defended them to myself as though I were standing in a courtroom no one else could see. But the silence was louder than my excuses. I made another cup of tea, pacing the kitchen while the kettle hissed, glancing at the phone every other minute. I even tried calling Emily Harris once, pretending I just wanted to hear her voice. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't want her to hear the ache in my tone. The hours crawled forward, the light outside shifting, shadows stretching across my living room. Still nothing. I thought back to the years when they were small, when forgetting my birthday was impossible. David Harris once made me a card with crooked letters and glitter glued in clumps. Emily Harris baked me cookies that tasted like burned sugar but smiled so wide I ate every crumb. They used to care. They used to know. Now I sat alone, 58 years old, with only a silent phone and a letter that whispered about betrayal. Was this what life had become? Waiting for love that didn't arrive, making peace with absence, rehearsing conversations in my head that would never happen. By evening, I stopped checking the phone. The call wasn't coming. The silence itself had become the message, and in that silence, the words of the letter seemed even sharper. You will have to decide what kind of mother, what kind of woman you truly are. I was abandoned, yes, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to face why. The letter hadn't moved from the table, but it felt alive, like it was breathing in the quiet room, waiting for me to look at it again. I tried to ignore it, tried to busy myself with dishes and dusting and folding laundry that didn't need folding. But every few minutes my eyes slid back to it, and at last I gave in. I picked it up, smoothed the paper flat, and read it again. This time slower, as if the words might change under a different light. You don't know me, but I know what was taken from you. You deserve to know what was stolen, even if it breaks everything. And then, further down, a line I hadn't noticed clearly before. Someone close to you chose themselves over you. Someone you trusted betrayed you, and you never saw it. My throat tightened as I whispered the words out loud. Someone close to me chose themselves, betrayed me. I pressed my palm to the table, steadying myself, because even as I read it, 1,000 little memories burst like sparks in the back of my mind. Robert Harris coming home late, avoiding my eyes. The sudden decisions that never made sense. The way certain topics were shut down before I could even finish my question. But it wasn't just Robert Harris that haunted me. It was the thought of my own children. David Harris, Emily Harris. Could the betrayal be tied to them? No, I refused to believe that. Yet the line of the letter lingered like poison. Someone you trusted, someone you loved. The writer gave no name, no hint, no signature, just accusation, like a whisper in the dark. Was it possible they were lying? That this was just some cruel stranger feeding off loneliness? Maybe. But the problem with lies is that they only sting when they touch something true. And the sting was sharp in me now. I tried to remember the exact moment when trust between me and Robert Harris began to thin. The missing paychecks, the unexplained withdrawals, the closed-door conversations with people I didn't know. I had pushed those thoughts away for years, telling myself I was imagining shadows, but the letter pulled those shadows into focus, shaping them into something undeniable. If someone had taken something from me, money, security, even love, how could I have been blind to it all this time? The words scratched at me louder now, as if the stranger was sitting across from me, daring me to confront the truth. Betrayal. That was the heart of it. And once the idea was planted, I couldn't unsee it. Every memory began to shift under its light, and nothing looked the same. The evening stretched long and heavy, and I found myself drawn to the bookshelf in the corner of the living room. On the bottom shelf sat 3 thick albums, their covers worn, the spines frayed from years of turning pages. I pulled them out one by one, setting them on the coffee table as though I were preparing an altar. Maybe I thought looking at the past would remind me of joy. Maybe I thought it would drown out the voice of the letter still echoing in my mind. The first photo was simple, David Harris at 3 years old, standing in the yard with a crooked smile, holding a toy truck high like it was treasure. Behind him, Robert Harris with his arm around my shoulders, his smile wide, his eyes shadowed. For years I thought that shadow was just the bad lighting of the old camera. Tonight, it looked different. It looked like someone hiding something. Page after page, the memories stared back at me. Emily Harris in her pink ballet dress, her grin missing 2 front teeth. Robert Harris clapping in the background, though I now noticed his hands were never really together, his eyes never quite on her. He was there but not there, present but detached. And I wondered, had I been blind to it all along? The family portrait from Christmas of 1995 made my stomach twist. We were all in matching sweaters sitting by the tree. I remembered how hard I had tried to make that evening perfect, but looking now, the perfection cracked. Robert Harris had his arm around David Harris, but his body leaned away from me. His smile didn't touch his eyes. My own smile, too wide, almost desperate. And in the corner, the faint blur of a gift box that had never been opened that night because Robert Harris had been late again. I turned another page, and another, and the album became less about memories and more about questions. Who were we really in those pictures? Were we a family? Or were we just pretending for the camera? Snapshots of something already unraveling? I whispered the names softly as I touched each photograph. David Harris, Emily Harris, my beautiful children who had once filled these walls with laughter. But even their faces now carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. Had they known? Had they seen something in Robert Harris that I refused to? The photo albums were supposed to bring comfort, but instead they accused me. Every picture seemed to hold a secret I hadn't been willing to see, smiles that looked too practiced, poses too stiff, eyes that avoided mine. I closed the last album with trembling hands. The past was no longer safe. Even the photographs had begun to betray me. It was nearly dark when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against the door, cutting through the quiet like stones thrown at glass. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one ever came by unannounced. For a moment I hesitated, my heart beating faster, a strange fear crawling up my spine. When I opened the door, it was just my neighbour, Mrs. Caldwell, a woman in her late 60s with kind eyes and a voice that always carried more than she intended. She lived 2 doors down and often brought me extra cookies or cuttings from her garden. Tonight she held a small plate covered in foil. "Made too much soup again, Margaret Harris," she said cheerfully, though her eyes flickered with curiosity as they drifted past me into the apartment. I invited her in, because that is what polite women do, even when their hands are trembling. She set the soup on my counter and looked around as though searching for something. "Quiet tonight," she said softly. "No children visiting?" I forced a smile. "Not tonight." She nodded, the way people nod when they want to ask more but know they shouldn't. And then, without warning, she lowered her voice. "You know, I heard something the other day about Robert Harris. Strange things people say, but, well, you were married to him, weren't you?" The name alone made my stomach tighten. I folded my arms, trying to sound casual. "What sort of things?" Mrs. Caldwell hesitated, biting her lip as if debating whether to continue. "Oh, I don't like gossip, but someone mentioned that back when he worked downtown there were issues. Money that didn't quite add up. Some said he had accounts no one knew about. Others said he wasn't always faithful. I don't know what's true, of course, but it reminded me of you, and I thought, maybe you should know." Her words dropped into the room like stones into still water, rippling out and touching every corner of my memory. Hidden money, secrets, betrayal. It was as if she had read the letter lying on my table. I managed a polite thank you, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. She patted my hand gently, unaware of the storm she had just stirred. "You're a strong woman, Margaret Harris. You always were. Don't let old ghosts trouble you." After she left, I stood alone in the doorway, the soup cooling on the counter, the silence pressing back in. The letter had hinted at betrayal. And now, out of nowhere, my neighbour's careless words had echoed the same truth. Coincidence? Or confirmation? I didn't know. But I felt the ground shift beneath me. The stranger's letter was no longer just ink on paper. It was a shadow reaching into my life, and others were beginning to see it too. That night, I couldn't sleep. The letter, the photographs, the words of Mrs. Caldwell, they circled me like vultures, pecking at every thought I tried to bury. Betrayal, hidden money, secrets. I lay awake staring at the ceiling until the early hours, and then something inside me snapped. I couldn't just sit here waiting for answers to fall from the sky. If there was truth buried in my past, I would dig it up myself. The first call I made was to an old friend of Robert Harris, a man named Charles Whitman who had worked with him years ago at the construction firm. My hand shook as I dialed, afraid he wouldn't remember me after so long. But when he answered, his voice carried the same easy warmth I remembered. Margaret Harris, my goodness, it's been years. What a surprise. I asked casually about the old days, about Robert Harris, about the firm. Charles grew quieter, his words more careful. Robert was complicated, he said at last. Talented, yes, but he had a way of making choices that benefited Robert first, everyone else second. There were whispers, Margaret, accounts, contracts that didn't quite make sense. I always thought you knew. I swallowed hard. No, Charles, I didn't. After the call, I went to the closet and pulled down an old cardboard box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the remnants of a marriage, bank statements, tax forms, papers I once thought too dull to matter. My fingers sifted through them until I found what I was looking for, monthly statements from the late 90s. My eyes scanned the numbers and there it was. Withdrawals that didn't match deposits, transfers to accounts I had never heard of, thousands of dollars vanishing into thin air. I sat at the table surrounded by papers, my heart pounding. Page after page revealed patterns I had never noticed before. While I was stretching every dollar to feed David Harris and Emily Harris, Robert Harris had been moving money in secret. I thought of the nights he came home late, the excuses that never felt solid, the gifts that suddenly appeared when I questioned him. I thought of myself back then, so trusting, so eager to believe in the family portrait I wanted to protect. The documents told a different story. By the time the sun rose, I was still at the table, surrounded by papers and shadows. The letter had promised that something had been taken from me. Now I could see it. It wasn't just money. It was truth. It was trust. And I had been blind to it for far too long. The cardboard box sat on the floor beside my chair, its edges soft with age, its lid sagging as though it carried more than paper inside. I had kept it for decades, moving it from one closet to another, telling myself it held nothing but the dull clutter of a life long past. Old tax returns, warranty slips, yellowed envelopes. But now, with the words of the letter echoing in my mind, the box seemed less like clutter and more like a vault. I pulled out folder after folder, spreading them across the table until the wood beneath disappeared under paper. Receipts from grocery stores, pay stubs, bills with Robert Harris's signature scrawled in his hurried handwriting. For a while, nothing looked unusual, just the ordinary record of a family's life. But then I found it. It was a single bank statement, folded twice, tucked into the pages of an unrelated file. The paper was thinner than the others, the ink slightly blurred, but the numbers were clear. An account I didn't recognize. The name on the top read Robert Harris, but the address listed wasn't ours. My breath caught as my eyes travelled down the page. Deposits, large ones, inconsistent, never matching his official salary, and withdrawals, scattered across the country, places Robert Harris had claimed he never travelled to, thousands of dollars. Month after month. I stared at the paper, my mouth dry. I tried to think of explanations. Maybe it was a business account, something I had forgotten. But no, if it were legitimate, why had he hidden it? Why fold it, slip it deep into another folder, never mention it? I traced my finger over one line, a withdrawal from San Diego. I remembered that month. I remembered struggling to pay Emily Harris's piano lessons, arguing with Robert Harris about tightening our budget, him insisting there was nothing extra. I had cried in the kitchen that night, thinking we were broke. And yet, here was proof. Money had existed. Money I had never seen. The room tilted as I realized the truth. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was deceit. Robert Harris hadn't been careless, he had been deliberate. He had chosen to keep secrets while I carried the weight of raising David Harris and Emily Harris, believing we were always just scraping by. I folded the statement carefully, my hands shaking, and placed it back on the table. The letter's warning rang louder than ever. Someone close to you chose themselves over you. Now I had proof. and the proof was colder than I ever imagined. I sat at the table with the bank statement spread before me, the morning light catching on its creases like it wanted to spotlight my shame. The truth was here in black and white, undeniable, irreversible. Robert Harris had hidden money, lied about our life, let me carry burdens while he lived in shadows I never saw. But now came the harder part. What to do with it? My first thought was David Harris and Emily Harris. Should I tell them? Should I put this paper in their hands and let them see what kind of father they had? They both adored him once, even after the divorce, even after his absence grew into silence. They built their own version of Robert Harris in their minds, polished and forgiving, because it's easier to love a memory than confront a truth. If I showed them this, I would shatter that memory forever. But then, what about me? Haven't I spent enough of my life protecting everyone else from pain? Haven't I sacrificed enough, swallowed enough secrets, carried enough weight to shield them? Why should I be the one who sits in silence yet again, pretending I never found this? I imagined Emily Harris's voice, sharp, defensive. Why are you digging this up, Mom? Why can't you just let the past rest? I imagined David Harris shaking his head, disappointment in his eyes. Not for Robert Harris, but for me. For daring to disturb the picture they had chosen to keep. If I said nothing, I would remain the keeper of this secret. Alone. Carrying it like a stone in my chest until the end of my days. If I said something, I might lose what little closeness I had left with them. The phone calls that were already rare might disappear completely. The family dinners that felt like obligations might vanish altogether. The letter had warned me, you will have to decide what kind of mother, what kind of woman you truly are. Was I the kind of mother who protected her children at any cost, even from the truth? Or was I the kind of woman who demanded honesty, even if it broke what little family remained? I pressed my hand against the statement, as though the paper itself might give me answers. All it gave me was silence. The truth sat before me, but speaking it could cost me everything. Silence would keep me safe, but it would also keep me a prisoner, and I could no longer tell which fate frightened me more. It was Emily Harris I called first. My hand trembled as I dialed, rehearsing words I wasn't sure I'd ever say. When her voice came through, tired but polite, I almost hung up. But the bank statement lay on the table in front of me, staring up like an accusation, and I couldn't keep silent anymore. Emily Harris, I began, my voice too formal. I found something in your father's old papers, something you should know. She sighed lightly, the kind of sigh that carries both impatience and weariness. Mum, it's been years. Why are you even looking through that stuff? Let the past go. I can't let it go. Emily Harris, there were bank statements, accounts I never knew existed, money moving in and out, hidden from us. While I was struggling to keep food on the table, he was... Stop. Her voice was sharp now. Mum, please. You've always done this. Always digging, always looking for something dark. Dad wasn't perfect, but he wasn't some criminal mastermind. Maybe you're just reading too much into it. The words cut deep because they were exactly what I had feared. Dismissal, disbelief. I tried again, desperation creeping into my tone. Emily Harris, this isn't my imagination. I held the papers in my hands. I saw the withdrawals, the addresses, the lies. Don't you see what that means? He betrayed us. No, Mom. You're betraying us. Right now. You're betraying me and David Harris by trying to ruin the memory we have left. Why do you always have to make everything complicated? My chest tightened. Because it is complicated. Because the truth matters. On the other end, I heard her voice waver, anger giving way to something softer, more wounded. Or maybe you just can't stand that Dad didn't love you the way you wanted. Maybe this is about you, not him. The silence that followed was thick and unbearable. My hand shook against the phone, my mouth dry. Emily Harris, I whispered. He lied to us all. I can't do this right now, she said. and then the line went dead. I sat frozen, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, the weight of her words pressing down on me. She didn't believe me. Worse, she thought I was inventing pain to cover my own. The letter had warned me this truth might break everything. And as I stared at the silent phone in my hand, I wondered if the breaking had already begun. I thought maybe if we sat together, just once like we used to, something might heal. So I invited them all. Emily Harris, David Harris, even my sister Margaret, who hadn't set foot in my home for over a year. I cooked all day, filling the kitchen with smells of roasted chicken, baked potatoes, and apple pie. It felt almost like old times when birthdays were loud and warm. But as the clock ticked closer to 6, a knot grew in my chest. They arrived one by one, polite smiles plastered on their faces, like actors playing a role they didn't want. Emily Harris kissed my cheek lightly, her eyes avoiding mine. David Harris carried a bottle of wine, the label still price-tagged, and muttered a quick, "Hi, Mom." Margaret entered last with her sharp perfume and sharper tongue, already scanning the room as if she were measuring how much things had changed, or hadn't. We sat down at the table and for a moment, just a brief moment, I believed it might work. Plates clinked, glasses poured, and small talk floated in the air. But the silence underneath was louder. Halfway through dinner, I couldn't hold it anymore. The words slipped out before I could stop them. "I know about the money." Forks froze mid-air. Emily Harris's face drained of colour. David Harris shifted in his seat, his eyes darting toward his sister. Margaret raised her eyebrows, waiting like a spectator at a play she'd seen coming all along. "What money?" David Harris asked, but his voice cracked. "The accounts," I said softly. "The withdrawals, the hidden statements your father left behind. I found them." Emily Harris slammed her fork down. "Not this again." "Mom, we already talked about it. Why are you trying to poison every memory we have of him?" "Because the memories were already poisoned," I whispered. "Don't you dare!" Emily Harris's voice rose sharp as broken glass. "You can't just rewrite our childhood, make Dad into some villain because you're bitter and lonely." David Harris leaned forward, his face red. "You think you're protecting us, but you're tearing this family apart. Do you even hear yourself?" Margaret let out a small, cold laugh. "Well, looks like your little secret isn't so secret anymore. Maybe you should have kept quiet, sister. Some truths aren't worth the wreckage." The room erupted, shouting, accusations, chairs scraping against the floor. Emily Harris stormed out first, her napkin flung onto the table. David Harris followed, slamming the door so hard the glasses rattled. Margaret stayed just long enough to say, "You got what you wanted, attention," before she too left. I stood alone in the wreckage of roasted chicken and spilled wine, the candle flames flickering like tiny mocking eyes. My family dinner, the one I thought could save us, had only confirmed what I feared most. We weren't a family anymore. We were pieces, sharp and broken, cutting each other just by being in the same room. The night air was colder than I expected, sharp against my skin as I stepped outside. My house still echoed with the arguments, with voices that used to sing me happy birthday. I couldn't stay inside those walls a minute longer, so I wrapped my coat tighter and began to walk. The streets were quiet, just the occasional car hissing past, headlights slicing through the dark. My shoes tapped against the pavement in a rhythm that matched the heaviness in my chest. I thought of Emily Harris's angry face, David Harris's sharp words, Margaret's cruel laugh. The people I loved most had left me sitting at a table set for family, surrounded only by silence and broken promises. Every step felt heavier, like I was carrying not just my body but the weight of years of sacrifice, of love given without asking anything in return, years of believing that blood ties meant something unbreakable. Tonight proved me wrong. I walked past the bakery where I used to take Emily Harris for cupcakes when she was small, past the park where David Harris once begged me to push him higher on the swings. Memories clung to the air like fog, but now they hurt more than they warmed. At the corner cafe, long closed for the night, I stopped to catch my breath. I leaned against the cold brick wall, and for a moment I thought the tears wouldn't come. But they did. Hot, unstoppable, blurring the streetlights into halos. I felt like a stranger in my own life. "Mrs. Harris?" A voice broke through the quiet. I turned quickly, startled. It was Samuel Reed, my old neighbour from years ago. He looked older, greyer, carrying a bag of groceries that seemed far too heavy for his thin arms. "I thought that was you," he said gently. "Out walking so late. Is everything all right?" I tried to nod, to smile, but the lie caught in my throat. My silence must have said everything, because Samuel Reed set his bag down and just stood beside me. "You don't have to tell me," he said softly. "But sometimes when it feels like the whole world has turned its back on you, it helps to remember. You're still here. And being here is enough." His words weren't fancy, but they slipped into the cracks of my heart like a warm light. For a few seconds, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just the mother nobody wanted to call. I was simply a person, standing under the streetlight with another human being who cared enough to notice. We walked together a few blocks before parting ways, and when I finally reached home, I didn't feel quite as hollow. The ache was still there, but it was softened by the reminder that even in loneliness, kindness can find you. Sometimes, from the people you least expect. The morning sun barely touched the curtains when I noticed it. Another envelope slipped neatly through the slot in my front door. My heart lurched as if someone had knocked the wind out of me. The first letter had shaken the foundation of my quiet life, but this felt like the beginning of something I wasn't sure I could survive. I picked it up with trembling hands. Same paper, same neat handwriting, same lack of return address. Whoever was sending these knew exactly what they were doing. My kitchen felt smaller as I sat at the table and slid a knife carefully across the seal. The letter was longer this time. More deliberate. "You think betrayal is a single act. It isn't. It's a pattern, one that repeats itself as long as there is someone willing to believe the lie. Your husband wasn't the only one. Your children learned from him. Look deeper, and you'll find the accounts, the transfers, the small favours that turned into big debts. None of it was an accident. You were the sacrifice they agreed upon, years ago." I read the words again and again, the letters blurring as my eyes filled with tears. My sacrifice. My life. A bargain made behind my back. It sounded too cruel to be real, and yet, hadn't I already begun to see the signs? The missing money, the whispered excuses, the way David Harris always seemed too nervous when money came up in conversation, the way Emily Harris dodged certain questions. I pressed the paper flat against the table, my fingers digging into it as though I could force it to give me answers. The first letter had felt like an accusation. This one felt like a verdict. A verdict against my family, against me, for being too blind to notice. My eyes scanned the bottom of the page. No name, no signature, just one line that chilled me to the bone. "The truth is closer than you think. And when you uncover it, you'll realize it was never about protecting you. It was always about protecting themselves." I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at that line, trying to breathe around the tightness in my chest. Could it be true? Could the betrayal I feared be not just a mistake, but a carefully built scheme? The kettle whistled on the stove, shrill and insistent, pulling me back into the present. I turned it off, my hands moving automatically, my mind somewhere else entirely. If this letter was right, then every memory I had, every laugh, every hug, every whispered promise, was shadowed by lies. And if I kept searching, I wasn't sure I'd be able to bear what I found. But I also knew one thing for certain: stopping wasn't an option anymore. Whoever was writing to me had already pulled me into the current, and there was no going back to still waters. Not now. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than I care to admit. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your skin and makes you hear your own heartbeat. My reflection looked back at me, lined face, tired eyes, lips pressed tight. I hardly recognized her. For years I had told myself that sacrifice was love, that giving everything I had, my time, my money, my dreams, was what made me a good wife, a good mother, a good woman. I believed that pouring myself out until there was nothing left was the proof of my devotion, but as I stared at the mirror, I whispered a question I had never dared to ask. What about me? The thought echoed like a forbidden prayer. What about my desires? What about the trips I never took, the career I set aside, the quiet evenings I traded for endless duties? What about the nights I swallowed tears so no one else would feel guilty, the mornings I pushed through exhaustion because someone needed breakfast, advice, money, comfort? I touched the glass, tracing the outline of my face. My skin was warm under my fingertips, but the woman looking back felt distant, like a stranger I'd abandoned long ago. The letters had forced me to see my family differently, but the mirror forced me to see myself. And the truth was painful. I had never once chosen myself. Not once. Every decision had been measured against the needs of David Harris, of Emily Harris, of Michael Harris. My life was a ledger, and my name was never in the Ode To column. I thought about the necklace I'd packed away years ago, the only gift I ever bought myself. Simple, nothing extravagant, but even then I had felt guilty wearing it. Guilty for keeping something for me. I had let guilt rule me for decades until it hollowed me out into a shape my family could use. My throat tightened as the realization sank deeper. Perhaps it wasn't just that they had betrayed me. Perhaps I had betrayed myself first, by always saying yes, by always stepping aside, by always swallowing the words I wanted to speak. I leaned closer to the mirror. No more, I whispered. The words trembled, fragile but real. No more. It wasn't a declaration of war, not yet. It was something quieter, something more dangerous. A seed of resolve. For the first time in decades, I was imagining a life where I wasn't only a mother or a wife or a caretaker. I was imagining being me. And that, I realized, was the most terrifying and liberating thought of all. The decision came to me like a wave crashing over rocks. Sudden, violent, undeniable. I couldn't go back to the silence that had ruled my life for so long. Silence had been my prison, and every time I swallowed my truth, the walls grew higher. That night, I knew I was done building walls around myself. I sat at the kitchen table, the second letter spread open in front of me, its words still burned in my mind. Betrayal, money, schemes. For days I had tried to absorb it, to soften it, to convince myself it wasn't as damning as it seemed. But there was no softening betrayal. There was no excuse for it, no justification. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of finally deciding to break free. I thought of all the times I had stayed quiet for the sake of peace, when David Harris made choices that left me with the consequences, when Emily Harris dismissed my advice as nagging, when Michael Harris avoided responsibility knowing I would clean up the mess. Every moment I'd bitten my tongue, every smile I'd forced, every nod I'd given, it all added up to a silence that stole my life from me. No more. I picked up the phone and set it down again. I wasn't ready for a call, not yet. Words spoken could be twisted, forgotten, denied, but words written, those remained. I pulled out a notebook, the one I used for grocery lists, and opened it to a clean page. My pen hovered, then began to move. I am not your silence anymore. The words looked strange on the page, bold, defiant. I wrote more, truths I had hidden, feelings I had swallowed, anger I had buried. Each sentence felt like a release, like a shackle falling away. By the time I filled 3 pages, my tears had dried. I wasn't crying from pain anymore, I was shaking from relief. For the first time, I understood that my silence had been part of their comfort. My quiet compliance had allowed them to live without guilt, without accountability. But the moment I spoke, truly spoke, everything would change. They would have to face me. They would have to face themselves. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. I gathered the pages, folded them, and slipped them into an envelope. Tomorrow I would hand it to them, or mail it, if my courage failed. Either way, my silence had ended tonight. I looked around the kitchen, the familiar space that had held so many swallowed words. "You don't own me anymore," I whispered to the ghosts of unspoken years. And with that, I turned out the light, feeling for the first time in decades, free. I had rehearsed the words 100 times in my head, but nothing could prepare me for the weight of actually saying them. The living room felt smaller than usual as Emily Harris stood across from me, arms folded, her face tight with suspicion. She had come because I insisted, no excuses, no delays. "Emily," I began, my voice steady, though my hands felt cold. "We need to talk. And this time, you need to listen." She rolled her eyes the way she always did when she thought I was being dramatic. "Mum, if this is about the letter again, I already told you. It's ridiculous. People send things to stir up trouble. You can't let yourself get carried away." I took a step closer, my pulse quickening. "Emily, this isn't about some anonymous letter. This is about years of silence. My silence. I let things slide, I swallowed my doubts, and I pretended everything was fine because I wanted to keep the peace. But peace built on lies isn't peace at all." Her expression faltered, just for a second. She wasn't used to me speaking like this. "I've spent my entire life protecting you, protecting Michael Harris, even protecting David Harris," I continued. "And what did it cost me? My voice, my joy, my very sense of self. Well, that ends now. I won't keep paying that price." Emily's tone sharpened. "So what are you saying? That you don't trust us? That you think we used you?" "I don't think it," I said firmly. "I know it. Maybe not always deliberately, maybe not with cruelty, but you did. You leaned on me when it suited you, and you ignored me when my truth was inconvenient. And I allowed it. I gave, and you all took, because I never drew a line." Her arms dropped to her sides. She looked younger suddenly, almost like the child I once held against my chest when storms frightened her. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "No more excuses. I love you, Emily. But love does not mean sacrificing myself until there's nothing left. Love means boundaries. Love means honesty. From now on, if you want my support, it comes with respect. If you want my trust, it comes with transparency. If you want my love, it comes without manipulation." The silence between us stretched long, heavy, unbreakable. Finally, Emily sat down, her shoulders slumping. I don't know if I can do that." I sat across from her, calm and resolute. "Then you'll have to decide if you want me in your life at all. Because I am no longer the woman who stays quiet just to keep everyone else comfortable." For the first time, Emily looked at me not as someone to lean on, but as someone she might lose. And that was exactly the shift I needed. The morning of my 71st birthday arrived quietly with no balloons, no cake, no voices filling the house. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of birds waking the neighborhood. And yet, for the first time in many years, I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't feel like something was missing. I stood by the window, holding a cup of tea in both hands, and let the steam rise to my face. The memory of past birthdays flickered. Children's laughter, candles glowing, Michael Harris clapping off key, Emily Harris handing me gifts wrapped in too much tape. Those moments were beautiful, but they also carried a shadow. Because behind each celebration, I had always been the one holding everything together, making sure everyone else was happy, even if it meant I was invisible. But this year was different. This year, the gift was something no one could buy, no one could wrap. It was mine alone, the gift of freedom. I thought of the confrontation with Emily, the way my words had hung in the air like a verdict. I had drawn a line, finally, after a lifetime of erasing myself. And whether she accepted it or not, the line was there. It was real. That realization filled me with a quiet strength I hadn't felt since I was a young woman. On the kitchen table sat the necklace Emily had once told me Rodney Harris had hidden away in his desk, the one he never gave me. I traced the pendant with my finger and smiled. I didn't need late gifts anymore. I didn't need apologies sealed in velvet boxes. The real present was the courage I'd found to reclaim myself. I whispered into the stillness of the house, "Happy birthday, Margaret Harris." Saying my full name out loud made me laugh softly. For years I had been just Mom, or just someone's wife, or just the dependable woman in the background. But today I was myself. I opened the back door and stepped outside. The air was cool and sharp with the scent of wet grass. I felt lighter than I had in decades. The world hadn't changed overnight, but I had. And that made all the difference. The last birthday gift was not in a box, not in a card, not even in the voices that may or may not call today. It was in the steady beat of my own heart reminding me that it still belonged to me. For the first time in so long, I celebrated not what I had given away, but what I had finally kept. Myself. I sat on the porch that evening, the sun slipping low behind the rooftops, painting the sky in shades of pink and amber, and I let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like forever. The house was quiet, the children gone, the echoes of past arguments already fading like mist. For decades, I had measured my life in service to others. Michael Harris, Emily Harris, friends, relatives. Always giving, always compromising, always shrinking myself so that everyone else could feel safe, comfortable, loved. And I believed that was love. I believed that was life. But as the cool breeze brushed my cheek, I realized something I had avoided for years. The greatest act of love is not always visible. Sometimes it is silent. Sometimes it is difficult. Sometimes it is terrifying. Sometimes it is choosing yourself, finally, even when it means facing anger, disappointment, or loneliness. I thought of the letters, the phone calls that never came, the dinners that ended in shouting, and the moments when I had felt utterly alone in a room full of people who called me family. And I understood, fully, that all of those trials had brought me here, to this exact moment of clarity. I didn't need approval. I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't need validation. I only needed the courage to stand firm, to know my worth, to recognize that protecting myself was not betrayal. It was preservation. I remembered the necklace, the one Rodney Harris had bought but never given me, now lying softly on the dresser. I touched it gently, smiling at the weight of the metal against my skin. It was a reminder that love can be complicated, messy, hidden, and even misdirected. But that did not diminish its existence. Love could also be strength. Love could also be clarity. Love could also be the choice to no longer be invisible in your own life. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. And I realized, finally, that my life did not have to revolve around others' expectations or their mistakes. I could honor my past without being imprisoned by it. I could love my children and still set boundaries. I could cherish memories and still carve a space for new ones that were mine alone. I exhaled deeply, feeling the tension leave my shoulders, and I whispered into the evening air, almost as if the wind itself would carry my words to those who needed to hear them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our family is the courage to finally choose ourselves. And in that moment, I believed it. Not as a lesson learned from a storybook, not as advice for anyone else, but as the truth that had been waiting for me all along. The gift was mine. The life was mine. And I would live it fully, with no apologies, with no regrets, and with the unwavering knowledge that choosing myself was the most profound act of love I could ever give. The sky darkened into twilight, and I stayed on the porch a little longer, letting the quiet wrap around me like a familiar shawl, knowing that tomorrow the world would go on. But I would go on too, finally, entirely free. What part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. If this story felt close to your heart, give it a like, subscribe if you want to be part of a space where real stories matter. Got a couple more minutes? Check out the next story. It's also about the things we rarely say out loud.